far more than just meddling. The allegation: a dozen Russian military officers waging cyber war to alter the course of an American election. How will the president react when he meets face-to-face with Putin? Here at home, conservative Brett Kavanaugh nominated to serve on the nation's highest court. Will his confirmation spark open combat over abortion rights and gay marriage? In the Lone Star State, mid-summer poll numbers place Democrats in striking range of Republican rivals. Could Texas actually turn less red come November? And beneath the rotunda in Austin, word that lawmakers will soon have more tax money to work with. How should the additional billions be invested, or should it be spent at all? I'm Greg Grugan, and welcome to Watch Your Point, where our panelists call it like they see it, so let's greet them. Starting us off, Republican strategist Jessica Colon. In the 2 spot, Bob Price, associate editor of Breitbart Texas. Next up, Republican State Senator Paul Bettencourt. Next up, businessman, columnist, and former Kemah Mayor Bill King. And closing us out on the hot corner, Chicano activist and educator Tony Diaz. Okay, let's do this. As the President of the United States stood beside the Queen of England, Justice Department officials 3,600 miles away announced the criminal indictment of a dozen Russian military operatives in connection with the hacking of the Democratic National Committee. The detailed charges of cyber espionage aimed at impacting the outcome of the presidential election come in advance of Mr. Trump's summit with Russian leader Vladimir Putin. Putin has told Mr. Trump there was no meddling. America's best investigators say they have proof that's a lie.
The conspirators created fictitious online personas, and they used those personas to release information, including thousands of stolen emails and other documents.
Okay, panel, what do you think of these indictments? I'm going to start with Jessica Colon.
Well, if we go back to what this is about, is if the Trump campaign colluded with Russians to do this. That is not what these indictments are about. These indictments are about them the Russian spies breaking into the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign. So that's one thing. We're still arguing the point and saying that it's a witch hunt if the Trump campaign had any colluding with Russians, and that is not what these indictments are about. It opens up a bigger thing, and I just heard on the news on the way over here, which is a completely valid point. We're spending all the time looking at what the Russians have done to break in and to meddle with our elections. What about the rest of the world? I'm quite certain that our other adversaries are trying to meddle in our elections too, and we should start looking at that and not just simply focusing on the Russians meddling in our elections. But if the Trump campaign colluded with Russians to do this, that is not proven. We're still in a witch hunt scenario, and we need to wrap up this investigation.
Bob Price, I've heard this called hybrid war, a war for the new millennium. Was it an act of war, and what should the president say to Putin tomorrow?
We've certainly seen the cyber warfare against the United States on many, many occasions. The United States has done the same in some other places in the past, particularly when you look at the Israeli elections with the Obama administration's interference in that election. So we don't have clean hands in this issue, but we do need to take action on it and protect our electoral process. Once again, these indictments show that we didn't need a special prosecutor in the first place. The only thing that the millions and millions of dollars we've spent on the special prosecutor have gotten us are indictments against people that could have been done through the regular Justice Department. Foreign nationals are the only people that have been indicted for interfering in the election. And then we've had some other process crimes that have come on from there. So as far as the meeting in Helsinki, the president needs to be firm on this issue, and they need to let him know that that's not going to happen. We need to find some ways to do it. If Germany would quit spending billions of dollars on natural gas from Russia and to spend that with the United States, that would do a lot to hurt Russia and help the United States and help the alliance.
Tony, I'm guessing that you're thinking that Trump will soft pedal this tomorrow.
Well, I'm really confused why President Trump is scared of Putin, because that's what it really appears like. So if you're in NATO, he'll yell at you, malign you in front of your people, and change the story once he thinks he's gotten what he wants. But if you're our enemy, sworn enemy, that sabotaged now evidently our elections, he soft pedals it. So to me, it's odd that he does seem scared. So we need to support President Trump so he doesn't feel scared against Putin, because he's got a big mouth against, you know, British people. He's got a big mouth against Canadians. Evidently, he thinks the Canadians are more of a serious threat, so maybe he's going to build a wall along the northern border as well, possibly. But it is mind-boggling that, of course, all these years of World War II, NATO, where all these alliances have helped fight back fascism, all of a sudden, he's ignoring all that. And here's the worst part. There is hard proof that Russians tampered, crossed the border into our elections. And here he is not confronting the person responsible for that. I'm shocked that our president is scared of Putin and tough on little kids at the border.
Okay, coming to Bill and Paul in just a second. The Russian indictments come during a week when critics contend the president ran roughshod over NATO allies, with particular punishment delivered to British Prime Minister Theresa May and German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Mr. Trump trashed May's handling of Brexit and suggested Germany was owned by the Russians because of long-term dependence on fossil fuels from the NATO rival. Is the president intentionally wrecking our relationships, or are his very publicly delivered criticisms justified? Going to Paul Bettencourt.
Look, here's the bottom line with all of this. The entire NATO contingent should be yelling at Putin because every single one of their elections has been, quote, crossed the border and violated by the Russians. Okay. Now, look, the Russians have been after all these, these elections, and in the U.S., the difference was the DNC guys had great passwords like passwords, and at least the RNC had passwords they could hack into. That's the only reason why they got in the DNC servers. So the bottom line is that we're looking at what's happened for the last several years. It's going to keep happening until people stand up, and that's what he's doing. That's what Trump is doing. He's trying to stand up and recognize the obvious, and I think it's going to be a pretty fascinating conversation with Putin this week.
Bill King, what's your read?
Well, I think everyone needs to remember that the special counsel's charge was once to determine if there was foreign influence, and then secondly, if there were any U.S. persons that cooperated or conspired with it. So, look, I think the first part of that charge is very important, and he appears to be doing that, and I'm glad to have the information out there and have a better understanding of exactly what they did. So far, no evidence has been brought forward that a U.S. person conspired. Whether that happens in the future is yet to be seen. But look, Trump is right. NATO does need to pay more. You know, he's right. They ought to be buying natural gas from us instead of the Russians. I think he's got every right to complain about that. But I agree with Tony in that I wish he was as hard on Putin as he is on our allies. I mean, every time he gets with him, it's this sort of buddy-buddy stuff. And look, I'm not one of those that thinks we shouldn't talk to our adversaries. I think you talk to everybody in the world. But I just wish he would use some of the same tough rhetoric on Putin that he uses on our allies.
Bob Price, is there another shoe to drop here or not?
Well, in terms of NATO, I served in NATO during the Cold War, and since the Cold War ended, the Europeans, for the most part, have taken the peace dividend and quit paying their fair share on the issue. Germany pays 1.2%, and they are the strongest economy in Europe. They pay 1.2% of their GDP into it. They're required to pay and agreed to pay at least 2% and should be paying more than that, because the primary purpose of NATO was to keep Russia out of Germany. And so that is where we need to go with that. The president is doing the right thing. You have to be tough on your allies because they will take advantage of you and have taken advantage of us for generations on this.
It's not just being tough on them. Let's just state the obvious again. Look, it's not just 2%. It's what's in the 2%. Well, the Greeks are spending close to 2%, but most of it's social welfare. Look, NATO has got to be retasked. They've got to realize what their mission is, and they've got to come up with a number that everybody agrees to pay. Otherwise, we're going to pay more because that's just the way the structure of the alliance is set up.
And them getting the peace dividend is an economic advantage for them and disadvantage to us.
Let me jump in here. We should take note that there were huge crowds, particularly in the United Kingdom, protesting Trump. I'm sure you were heartened by that, Tony.
Well, I got to really commend Britain on their piñata game, because they've taken the Trump piñata and made it this huge balloon that has made international news. And of course, Trump insulted the multicultural mayor of London, who then gave protesters permission to fly this huge dirigible like piñata. That's one thing. Secondly, I want to remind folks, World War I, World War II, very expensive, and to put off World War III, NATO's been very handy in that. So I think we should all remain friends, and we need them.
Real quick, Jessica.
Art of the deal, Trump said, no, NATO, you should do 4%, just to make sure everybody does do their 2%. And with these protests, with the paid protesters that are going on around the world, these protesters are having less effect on the issues that they want, and they're showing that they really don't represent the majority opinion.
Gonna leave it right there. When we return, a new conservative for the nation's highest court. Who is Judge Brett Kavanaugh, and can Democrats torpedo his confirmation? Stay with us.